I found out my parents destroyed my credit and stole my identity when I was applying for my first apartment at 22. They used my name to take out a $92,000 loan, and when I confronted them, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You owe us for raising you." But what they didn't know was that I had been secretly recording our conversations for months. Hi everyone, I'm Sophia Chen, and I'm 24 years old. 2 years ago, I thought I had the perfect relationship with my parents. Sure, we had our ups and downs like any family, but I genuinely believed they had my best interests at heart. I was so wrong, it almost destroyed my entire future. Let me paint you a picture of who I'm dealing with here. My mother, Linda Chen, is 48 years old and works as a real estate agent in Phoenix, Arizona. On the surface, she's this bubbly, charismatic woman who could sell ice to an Eskimo. She's the type of person who remembers everyone's birthday, brings casseroles to sick neighbors, and volunteers at church fundraisers. But underneath that perfect facade was a gambling addiction that had been spiraling out of control for years, and I had absolutely no idea. My father, Mark Chen, is 52 and works in construction as a foreman. He's one of those quiet, hardworking guys who comes home covered in dust every day and never complains. Growing up, I saw him as this steady, reliable presence in our house. He was the one who helped me with math homework and taught me how to change a tire. What I didn't realize until much later was that he had become an enabler, constantly covering for my mother's destructive behavior because he was too afraid of confrontation to stop her. Then there's Jake Morrison, my boyfriend of 2 years. Jake is 26 and in his second year of law school at Arizona State University. He's one of those people who's naturally curious about everything and has this incredible ability to break down complex legal concepts into terms normal people can understand. Without Jake, I never would have known how deep this rabbit hole went or had the courage to fight back. He became my anchor during the darkest period of my life. But here's the thing that makes this story so twisted. I had no warning signs. None. My parents had always been secretive about money, sure, but I thought that was just how adults handled finances. They never let me see bills, never discussed their income, and whenever I asked questions about money growing up, they'd brush me off with, "Don't worry about adult stuff, Sophia. Focus on your grades." Looking back now, I can see red flags everywhere. We moved houses 6 times during my childhood, always with some excuse about finding a better neighborhood or getting a good deal. My mother would disappear for entire weekends, claiming she was at real estate conferences or visiting her sister in Tucson. My father would get these weird, tense phone calls that he'd take outside in the backyard, speaking in hushed tones that I could never quite make out. But at 22, fresh out of college with my marketing degree and finally ready to start my adult life, I trusted them completely. I had worked my butt off through college, juggling 3 part-time jobs to pay for expenses my partial scholarship didn't cover. I lived in cramped dorm rooms and survived on ramen noodles for 4 years because I didn't want to burden my parents with additional costs. I felt guilty about not helping them financially, especially when my mother would call me crying about how tight money was getting. The irony is devastating when I think about it now. While I was working double shifts at a campus coffee shop and a retail store, struggling to save every penny I could, my parents were living it up on money stolen from my future. They were using my identity, my social security number, my clean credit that I had never even used, to fund a lifestyle I couldn't afford even with 3 jobs. The moment I discovered what they had done, my entire world shifted. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about trust, about unconditional love, it all crumbled in an instant. But what happened next, the way they tried to manipulate and gaslight me when I confronted them, that's when I realized I wasn't dealing with parents who had made a mistake. I was dealing with predators who had been grooming their own daughter as their personal ATM machine. And that's when I decided to fight back. Growing up, I genuinely believed I had won the parent lottery. We lived in this beautiful 2-story house in Scottsdale with a swimming pool and perfectly manicured lawn. Every Christmas morning looked like something out of a magazine, mountains of presents under a 12-foot tree. My mother bustling around in her matching pajama set. My father making his famous Christmas morning pancakes. We took family vacations to Disneyland, Yellowstone, and even Hawaii twice. I went to St. Catherine's Preparatory Academy, a private school that cost more per year than most people make. From the outside, we were the American dream. My mother drove a brand new BMW every 2 years, always in some shade of metallic silver. My father had his lifted Ford F-150 that he was obsessed with, constantly adding new modifications and accessories. Our house was always filled with the latest gadgets, big screen TVs, gaming systems, top-of-the-line appliances that my mother would show off to the neighbors. But even as a kid, something felt off. We moved 6 times before I turned 16, and each time my parents had a different explanation. First, it was, we found a house with a better school district. Then it was, the neighborhood is going downhill. Then, we got such a good deal we couldn't pass it up. I remember asking my father once why we moved so much when I was about 12, and he got this weird, uncomfortable look on his face before saying, "Sometimes adults have to make complicated decisions, Sophia. You'll understand when you're older." Money was this strange, forbidden topic in our house. Whenever I'd ask questions about our finances, like why we couldn't go on vacation with my friend's family, or why my mother seemed stressed when she was paying bills, I'd get shut down immediately. "Don't worry about adult stuff," was my mother's favorite phrase. "Your job is to focus on school and let us handle everything else." They actively discouraged me from learning about money or credit. When I turned 16 and wanted to get a part-time job like my friends, my mother practically had a meltdown. "You don't need to work, sweetheart. You're too young to worry about money. Besides, your grades might suffer, and college is what really matters." When I asked about getting a debit card for my 18th birthday, my father said, "There's no rush. We'll handle your expenses until you graduate college. Credit cards are dangerous for young people anyway." I thought they were being protective. Now I realize they were being strategic. During my college years at Arizona State University, the financial stress at home became impossible to ignore. My mother's phone calls became more frequent and more emotional. She'd call me crying, saying things like, "I don't know how we're going to make it through this month, Sophia. The bills just keep piling up." She'd tell me about unexpected car repairs, medical expenses, or work being slow for my father. I felt this crushing guilt that I was spending money on college while my parents were struggling. I remember one conversation during my junior year that haunts me now. My mother called me sobbing, saying they might lose the house. "I'm so sorry we can't help you more with school expenses, baby. I know you're working so hard, and here we are, barely keeping our heads above water. Sometimes I wonder if we failed you as parents." I spent that entire night crying, feeling like a selfish, ungrateful daughter for not finding a way to help them financially. What I didn't know was that during those same phone calls where my mother was crying about money troubles, she was sitting in casino parking lots, having just blown hundreds or sometimes thousands of dollars on slot machines and poker tables. The medical expenses were gambling debts. The slow work for Dad was money she'd stolen from their joint account to feed her addiction. My relationship with Jake started during my senior year, and he was the first person to point out how weird my family's relationship with money was. "It's strange that your parents never taught you about credit or banking," he'd say. My parents had me open a checking account when I turned 16 and got my first credit card at 18 to build credit history. When I'd tell him about my mother's tearful phone calls, he'd get this concerned look and say, "Sophia, something doesn't add up. If your parents are as broke as they claim, how are they still living in that expensive house and driving new cars?" But I defended them fiercely. They were my parents. They loved me. They were just trying to protect me from adult worries. I had no idea that while I was defending them to my boyfriend, they were systematically destroying my financial future with every forged signature and fraudulent application. The moment that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning in March. Jake and I had been apartment hunting for weeks, and we finally found the perfect place. A cute 2-bedroom in Tempe with hardwood floors and a little balcony overlooking a courtyard. The rent was $1,400 a month, which we could afford with our combined incomes from my marketing coordinator job and Jake's part-time work at a law firm. I was so excited filling out the rental application. I had steady employment, a decent salary, and I'd never missed a payment on anything because I'd never had any bills in my name. I thought I was the ideal tenant. The property manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, seemed impressed with my application and said she'd run the credit check that afternoon. The call came 3 hours later. "I'm sorry, Miss Chen, but we can't approve your application." Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice apologetic but firm. Your credit score is 427, and you have several delinquent accounts. We require a minimum score of 650. I sat in my car in the parking lot, staring at my phone in complete confusion. There has to be some mistake, I told her. I've never had a credit card or any kind of loan. I don't even have any credit history. According to the report, you have quite extensive credit history, she replied. I'd recommend pulling your credit report to see what's going on. My hands were shaking as I called Jake. Something's wrong with my credit report, I said, trying not to cry. They're saying I have bad credit, but that's impossible. Jake met me at my apartment 20 minutes later with his laptop. Let's pull your credit report right now and figure this out, he said, already typing in the URL for one of the free credit monitoring sites. What we found destroyed my world in an instant. There were 7 accounts in my name that I had never opened. A $92,000 home equity loan from Chase Bank, dated 3 years ago when I was a sophomore in college. 3 credit cards. A Capital One with a $15,000 limit that was maxed out. A Discover card with $8,000 in debt, and a store credit card with $4,500 in charges. There was also a car loan for $28,000 for a 2019 Toyota Camry that I had never seen, and 2 smaller personal loans totaling another $12,000. The total debt in my name was over $159,000. I felt like I was going to throw up. Jake kept saying, "This has to be identity theft. Someone stole your information." But as we looked closer at the addresses on the accounts, my stomach dropped further. They were all addresses where my family had lived. The phone numbers were my parents' numbers. The employment information listed my father's construction company. "Jake," I whispered, pointing at the screen with a trembling finger. "These are my parents' addresses, their phone numbers." The room went silent except for the sound of my laptop fan whirring. I drove to my parents' house that same evening, my printed credit reports clutched in my sweaty hands. My mother was in the kitchen making dinner when I walked in, and she greeted me with her usual bright smile. "Sophia, what a nice surprise. I'm making your favorite—" "We need to talk," I interrupted, spreading the papers across their kitchen table. "All of us, right now." My father came in from the living room, took one look at the papers, and his face went completely white. My mother glanced down at the credit reports, and I watched her entire demeanor change. The sweet, loving expression vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Sophia, sweetheart, I can explain." "You stole my identity," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the fact that I felt like I was falling apart inside. "You opened accounts in my name. You destroyed my credit. You took out a $92,000 loan using my information. My mother's response will haunt me for the rest of my life." She didn't apologize. She didn't look ashamed. Instead, she straightened up, crossed her arms, and said, "You don't understand how expensive it was to raise you, Sophia. Private school tuition, dance lessons, all those family vacations, helping with your college expenses. Do you have any idea what 18 years of raising a child costs?" I stared at her in disbelief. "So you committed fraud?" "We're family," my father chimed in, finally finding his voice. "We would have paid it back eventually. It's not like we were trying to hurt you." That's when my mother delivered the line that made me realize I was dealing with strangers, not the parents who had raised me. "You owe us for raising you, Sophia. Consider this payback for everything we've done for you over the years." The woman I had loved and trusted my entire life was telling me that raising me had been a business transaction, and now the bill was due. I drove home from my parents' house that night in complete shock. Jake was waiting for me in my apartment parking lot, and the moment he saw my face, he knew it was bad. I collapsed into his arms and told him everything. How my mother had looked me in the eye and said I owed them for raising me. How my father had acted like stealing my identity was just a family favor that got out of hand. "Sophia, what they did is serious federal crime," Jake said, holding me while I cried. "This isn't just family drama. This is identity theft, fraud, and forgery. You could press criminal charges." But part of me still couldn't accept it. These were my parents. Despite everything, I kept thinking there had to be some way to resolve this without destroying our family completely. So I called my mother the next morning, hoping that maybe after sleeping on it, she'd realize how wrong this was and we could figure out a solution. Instead, she doubled down. Sophia, I've been thinking about our conversation last night, she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. Your father and I have decided that if you're going to be ungrateful and threaten us over this, we'll take you to court. We have documentation showing you authorized those loans. What documentation? I asked, though I already knew the answer made my stomach drop. Oh, we have all the paperwork, sweetheart. Your signatures, everything. You might not remember signing them because you were so busy with school, but you definitely agreed to help us with family finances. She was lying. I had never signed anything, never agreed to any loans, never even seen most of these documents. But the confidence in her voice terrified me. What if they had forged my signature so well that I couldn't prove it was fake? What if they had somehow manipulated the situation so thoroughly that I couldn't fight back? That's when Jake suggested something that changed everything. Arizona is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. If they're going to lie about what happened, maybe we need to get them telling the truth on tape. At first, the idea made me feel sick. Recording my own parents felt like such a betrayal. But then I realized they had been betraying me for years. Every time they used my name, every time they forged my signature, every time they looked me in the eye and lied about their financial struggles while spending my money, they were betraying me. I downloaded a legal call recording app that Jake recommended and started documenting every conversation. The first few calls were frustrating because my parents were being careful, sticking to their story about how I had agreed to help with family finances. But I could tell my mother was getting increasingly agitated that I wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, Jake was helping me build my legal case. We gathered every piece of evidence we could find. My college enrollment documents with my real signature, my employment records showing I was in Arizona when several of the loans were supposedly signed in person in Phoenix banks, even my dorm room keycard logs that proved I was on campus during some of the alleged signing dates. The smoking gun came during my fourth recorded conversation with my mother. I had been asking her specific questions about the loans, pretending I was trying to understand the situation better. She was getting frustrated with my questions, and I could hear that familiar edge in her voice that meant she was about to lose her temper. Mom, I'm just trying to understand how I could have signed for a home equity loan when I was living in a dorm room and had never even seen the house it was secured against, I said, keeping my voice calm and confused rather than accusatory. Look, Sophia, she snapped, her fake sweet tone finally cracking. I had to forge your name because you weren't here to sign the papers when we needed them. It's not like it's real fraud. You're our daughter, for crying out loud. The money went toward raising you anyway, so what's the difference? There it was. Full confession to forgery and fraud, recorded crystal clear on my phone. But she wasn't done. And frankly, I'm getting tired of you acting like you're some kind of victim here. Do you know how much money we spent on you over the years? Private school, dance lessons, family vacations, help with college. You've been living off us your entire life, and now you want to act like we owe you something? As I listened to her rant, something shifted inside me. The guilt, the confusion, the desperate hope that we could fix this as a family, it all evaporated. I wasn't talking to my mother anymore. I was talking to a criminal who had been systematically stealing from me for years and felt completely justified in doing it. When I hung up that call, I looked at Jake and said, "Call your law school contacts. I want the best lawyer we can find. We're going to court." 3 months later, I found myself sitting in a Maricopa County courthouse, wearing my best professional dress and trying to keep my hands from shaking. My parents had followed through on their threat to sue me, claiming I was trying to shirk my family obligations, and that I had verbally agreed to take responsibility for the family's financial needs. They were asking the court to force me to honor the debt and pay them an additional $50,000 in damages for emotional distress and legal fees. I watched my parents walk into the courtroom with their lawyer, a sleazy-looking guy in an expensive suit who kept whispering reassurances in their ears. My mother was dressed like she was going to church, all fake pearls and painted-on innocence. She even brought tissues, ready to play the part of the heartbroken mother whose ungrateful daughter was tearing the family apart. My lawyer, Sarah Martinez, was a specialist in financial fraud cases that Jake had found through his law school connections. She was this no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had seen every dirty trick in the book. "Don't worry," she had told me during our prep sessions. "The truth has a way of speaking for itself in situations like this." Judge Patricia Hernandez entered the courtroom, and I could tell immediately that she wasn't someone who tolerated games. She was probably in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and the kind of direct gaze that made you want to tell the truth even if you hadn't planned to. My parents' lawyer went first, spinning this elaborate story about how I was an ungrateful daughter who had lived a life of luxury at my parents' expense and was now trying to abandon my family responsibilities. "Your Honor," he said with practiced sympathy, "my client sacrificed everything to give their daughter the best possible life. Private education, family vacations, college support. They poured their life savings into this young woman's future. When financial hardship struck, she verbally agreed to help carry some of the family's financial burden. Now she's claiming she never agreed to anything, trying to leave her parents destitute after all they've done for her." He presented their evidence, documents with what were supposedly my signatures, bank records showing money being spent on family expenses, and even printed emails that they claimed were from me agreeing to help with finances. I stared at those papers in horror, realizing how meticulously they had planned this fraud. Then my mother took the stand. She was perfect in her performance, crying at all the right moments, talking about how much they loved me, how hurt they were that I would turn on family like this. She claimed that I had called them several times during college, upset about their financial struggles, and had begged them to let me help. She said, "Mom, we're family. Use my credit if you need to. I trust you completely." My mother testified, actual tears streaming down her face. It was a masterclass in manipulation, and for a moment I wondered if the judge was buying it. When it was our turn, Sarah kept it simple. "Your Honor, we'd like to present some audio evidence that was legally obtained under Arizona's one-party consent law." She played the recording of my mother's confession, and the entire courtroom went silent. My mother's voice filled the room, crystal clear and undeniably hers. "Look, I had to forge your name because you weren't here to sign the papers when we needed them. It's not like it's real fraud. You're our daughter, for crying out loud." I watched my mother's face go from confident to confused to absolutely terrified as her own words played back. My father looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Their lawyer's mouth literally fell open, but Judge Hernandez held up her hand after just 30 seconds of the recording. "Stop the playback," she said firmly. She looked directly at my parents with an expression of complete disgust. "I've heard enough." The judge leaned forward, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "In 23 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered such a clear-cut case of identity theft and financial fraud. What you have done to your own daughter is not only illegal, it's morally reprehensible." She turned to my parents' lawyer. "Counselor, I suggest you advise your clients that they are potentially facing federal criminal charges for identity theft, mail fraud, and conspiracy. This case is dismissed with prejudice in favor of the defendant." The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. My mother tried to approach me as we left the courtroom, tears streaming down her face, but I walked past her without a word. 24 years of lies, manipulation, and theft had just been exposed in 30 seconds of audio. There was nothing left to say. 6 months after that courtroom victory, I'm sitting in the apartment that Jake and I were originally rejected for, the same one that started this entire nightmare. The property manager, Mrs. Rodriguez, called me personally to apologize when my credit score jumped from 427 to 720 after all the fraudulent accounts were removed. "I've never seen anything like it," she said. "Your score improved faster than anyone I've ever worked with." But the numbers only tell part of the story. The legal aftermath was swift and devastating for my parents. Within 2 weeks of the court ruling, my mother was facing federal charges for identity theft, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation, and she had to enter court-mandated gambling addiction counseling as part of her plea agreement. She ultimately served 8 months in minimum security prison and was ordered to pay full restitution, every penny of the $159,000 in fraudulent debt, plus legal fees and damages. My father filed for divorce 3 months after the trial. It turns out he'd been documenting my mother's gambling addiction for years, secretly hoping to get her help, but too afraid of confrontation to actually do anything about it. When I think about him now, I feel this complicated mixture of me of anger and pity. He enabled her behavior for so long that he became complicit in destroying my future. But I also recognize that he was another one of her victims in many ways. The strangest part has been learning who I really am without their manipulation. For 24 years, I lived with this constant underlying guilt about not being grateful enough, not helping enough, not being the perfect daughter they had sacrificed so much for. I realize now that they had trained me to feel responsible for their problems, to believe that my worth was measured by how much I could give them. Jake and I got engaged 4 months ago. When he proposed, he said something that made me cry. "I love watching you discover how strong you actually are. You've been buried under their manipulation for so long, but now I get to see the real Sophia, and she's incredible." We're planning a small wedding next spring, just close friends and the family members who supported me through this mess, like my Aunt Carol, who told me she'd suspected something was wrong for years but didn't know how to intervene. I've completely cut contact with my mother. She writes me letters from prison that I return unopened. She calls from different numbers, leaving voicemails where she alternates between tearful apologies and angry accusations that I destroyed the family. I delete them without listening. My therapist helped me understand that this is another manipulation tactic. She's trying to make me feel responsible for the consequences of her own actions. My relationship with my father is slowly rebuilding, but it's complicated. He reached out about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, wanting to apologize and try to rebuild our relationship. We meet for coffee once a month now, and he's been completely honest about the financial abuse he witnessed over the years. He's also in therapy, trying to understand how he became so passive in the face of my mother's destructive behavior. But the most important change has been in how I view myself and my relationships. I've started volunteering with a nonprofit that helps young adults who've been victims of family financial abuse, and I'm shocked by how common this is. Apparently, family members commit identity theft against their children and relatives far more often than strangers do. I share my story at workshops, and I can't tell you how many people come up to me afterwards saying, "I thought I was the only one." I've learned to trust my instincts in ways I never did before. When something feels wrong in any relationship, romantic, professional, or personal, I don't ignore that feeling anymore. I've learned that love without respect is manipulation, and that family doesn't give anyone the right to exploit or abuse your trust. My credit score isn't the only thing that got rebuilt over these past months. I rebuilt my sense of self-worth, my understanding of healthy boundaries, and my definition of what family actually means. Real family protects each other. Real family builds each other up instead of tearing each other down for personal gain. I still get voicemails from my mother asking for money, asking for forgiveness, asking for another chance. I delete them without listening because I finally learned the most important lesson of my life. I'm worth more than being someone else's financial safety net. I'm worth more than their guilt trips and manipulation. And sometimes, the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. The girl who trusted blindly is gone. In her place is a woman who knows her worth, protects her boundaries, and refuses to set herself on fire to keep other people warm. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, and I appreciate you taking the time to understand what happened to me and my family. If this story resonated with you, or if you've experienced something similar, please know that you're not alone. There are resources available to help, and it's never too late to protect yourself and rebuild your life. If you found this video helpful or eye-opening, I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a thumbs up. It helps other people find these stories and realize they're not alone in what they're going through. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever experienced financial abuse from family members? Do you have your own story of standing up to toxic family dynamics? Or maybe you have questions about the legal process I went through. I read every single comment and try to respond to as many as I can. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real people sharing their experiences with family drama, legal battles, and finding the strength to fight back, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Your support means everything to me and helps me continue sharing these important stories. Remember, your worth isn't determined by how much you sacrifice for others. You deserve to be treated with respect, even by family. Trust your instincts, protect your boundaries, and never be afraid to stand up for yourself. I'll see you in the next video. Take care of yourselves out there.